Greetings, pilgrims, and welcome to another episode of the Polygon Pilgrimage. Today I wanted to show you some of my work in Substance Designer. I was working with a friend of mine to build this material here, which is supposed to be a marble, and he seemed to be very impressed with it so far. It's still very much a work in progress, but I wanted to show you guys how we got from absolutely nothing to this material here. And we can go through the steps together, and I can show you some of the nodes and explain kind of how it works. So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so here we are inside of Substance, and you can see I've docked our 3D view over here. And I'm just going to go through briefly and in not too low level of detail here, kind of high level, just how we went from left to right here to create our final outputs. So what I usually do for all of my substances is the final 4 textures that we're going to end up with. I usually move them to the side here. If you right click and say add a frame, it will create this little box around them, and now all those pieces move together, which is really handy. And you get a nice little comment up here. So I usually call this final outputs. There we go. So now we know where our final outputs are, and the reason why that's important is as we zoom out, you can see that that retains its size regardless of how big or small the actual graph gets, so that we can now see all of our parts of our material very clearly where they exist, so we can zoom into those areas and work on those individual areas, and it's a lot more organized. So let's start at the beginning here, and what we needed to do first was create sort of a material that is a mixture of 2 colors, a lighter version of a darker version. And I wanted to use a mask here. So my mask is a clouds mask, and it just blends the 2 together nicely, so we get this sort of generic looking, you know, it's got some light and dark values, but it's nothing fantastic yet. So then what I did was I went over here and I continued that blend and blended this with another mask. And on top of my original, you see here, this is the background input, and then here is the foreground input. So the top of that I put another color, and it's just a slightly lighter version of the original color. And this is what I ended up with, so a little bit more breakup of the pattern here. We don't want it to be too repetitious. We want it to look natural and sort of random, but not necessarily random, but procedural, so it has some structure to it, but it's not pieces everywhere for no good reason. Next, we continued that idea of adding things on top, but what we added this time was this here is a kind of swirly effect. Now, how did we get this swirly effect? So this was my mask back to our original material here. So let's work backwards. So from this mask, this is my swirly effect. This is actually a warp of this and this. So I'm using these 2 things to say I want this pattern, but I want you to use this to control or to power this warp. So once that warp is powered, I get these really kind of crazy lines in here, and this looked a lot closer to my reference. So then I went ahead and said, okay, let's go ahead and color them this color and overlay them on top. And you can see here what we're getting. This is a much nicer material already. Now, moving along, one more time I added another color, a darker color this time, on top of everything to sort of muddy it down just a little bit, so that we get the hint that things are built up in layers like they really are. So this was my mask for this, just another, you know, clouds type of Gaussian effect, and I put a darker color on top, and this is what we end up with. Now, one last time, I come over here and say, I need to get some of those lines coming back, so what I did now was I took a levels off of this pattern, and what I did here was, this pattern is originally white with black lines. I needed the inverse. So what you do is anytime you want to take a pattern like this and input it into a mask, but you want to reverse it, throw it through a levels point, and down here where you see the little white and black dots here, these little triangles, reverse them. They're initially like this, okay? So I just took the black one, slid it over, took the white one, crossed it over, and then white all the way and black all the way. And when you do that, you end up with the inverse of your original mask. Might be a little hard to see. I'll zoom in quite a bit so you guys can see it there. Okay, so that's what we got, and then when we apply those 2, now this is my mask to a pure white color, and this is what I get. So I get some of those lines coming back into my material, and it looks fantastic so far. Alright, now it looks like I've broken some things. Let me reattach. There we go. Okay, so then what I wanted to do was I wanted to really get some topmost squiggly lines, but I wanted them to be not in such a total coverage. I wanted the coverage to be broken up. So what I've done up here is I've taken an original pattern, I did a levels so that I can go back at any time and I can adjust how much or how little I could space it out more. And you can see over here on my 3D view, if I zoom in a little bit, as I do this, you can see this would mean fewer squiggles, this would mean a lot more squiggles. So depending on the kind of look you're going for, I wanted sort of something like this. That looks pretty good. So this allows me to have some control over the final output. So I'm going to blend this with a near white color, a white color, and put that on top of this. So let me delete this again and re-add it. There we go. If you see those dotted lines, that means that the output has been broken because you've been making changes too far back in the stack, and you just delete them and reattach them. So now we ended up with our final diffuse or color only output here. So I just plugged that right over into our diffuse or color only output. Now to make our normal map, we wanted to, it looks very subtle here in the viewport, on the video perhaps as well, but in Engine it looks fantastic. I might even have, yeah, this is what it looks like in Unity. The final output looks fantastic in Unity. So what I wanted to do here with the normal map was I needed to have some more control. So I wanted to split the normal map into two parts. The one part would represent just my normal colors here and the buildup, and the other part would represent some of the scratches and the grooves so that I could separate those and control them individually. So what we've done here is if you follow these lines backwards, you'll notice that this is coming directly from way back in the stack when we had mostly just our colors before we started adding the first scratches. So from there, I bring it all the way over to a gradient conversion. This takes all the color out of it and just gives me my black and white values. Now from there, I plugged it into a levels so that I can always control it, and then I plugged that into a normal map. And if I turn this off, you can see. It's very subtle on the video here, but it is there. Now, what I did was I took the same gradient here before the levels, and I dragged that all the way down and plugged it in further. We'll notice that in a moment. I just wanted you to see all those lines. Okay? Now from here, I have another normal map. Let's work backwards and see where this guy comes from. He comes from our squiggle pattern. So I wanted just the squiggle pattern. So I brought that guy over. He's going through a gradient. If I undock this, you'll see he's going through a gradient, and then into a grayscale conversion, and then into a levels, so that I can control it again. We go into our normal map, and then this is a normal combine, so it combines the two normal maps finally at the end of the chain, and then we hook it over into the final normal map. Now we're going to look at how we create the specular and the gloss materials and what these allow us to do here. Alright, so now we're going to look at why we have these levels here and how we can control more accurately our glossiness and specular. Now you may notice the graph and the layout looks a little different. Substance actually crashed on me, but that's okay. We're right back to where we were. So we take our grayscale over here that we used before and we plug it through a levels into the final outputs. The reason why we do that is so that, once again, we can have better control over our final outputs here. If you plug this directly in, it might be too dark or too light, and you wouldn't be able to fine-tune and adjust how shiny you want your marble to be. You might want it a little duller. You might want it really shiny for some stylistic looks. You know, it all depends. Another thing you can do for these levels here at the end is instead, if you do a uniform color and a blend node, and you bring whatever your output is. So for instance, what I'm going to do here is just make a copy of this and bring him down. There it is. Okay, so this is just a copy, so don't worry about the lines there. And what you can do here is plug him into the background, plug your uniform color into the foreground. And if you look here, okay, I see what he's complaining about. There we go. Make it all grayscales. There we go. So right now it's solid black, so that's why it's coming out solid black. But if I go up here and I start to adjust, and I bring this up a bit, you should be able to see. Maybe I'm not getting what I'm looking for. There we go. So using this as a grayscale and our final output as a grayscale, we blend the two together, and based upon our blending mode, I had to change it so that we could actually see it, because the copy just puts it directly over top. Now I can control exactly how light or dark this is at the end just by changing this color. So if I double click this to say I want to see the output of this here, but I left click this, you'll notice I'm still seeing the output of this guy, the last thing I double clicked, but now I can alter this one. So as I click and drag, you'll notice I can make this lighter or darker. So I can go for a really light value, or really dark value rather, very light on the details, or I can go for a very, very shiny value here, closer to what we have in the final output. But this now gives me a control. So this is a parameter that you could expose this parameter, and then when you bring this into your game engine, you'd have control over your specular and gloss by just controlling the color of this. Now it's not so much a color because this is a grayscale value, so it's only a light or dark value, but that's not such a big deal. We can control that now, which is so cool for inside of Substance Designer and inside of Unity or whatever your game package is that you're building games in. So I hope you guys have really enjoyed this little look at a material. Let me know what you think. I've been getting some really positive feedback to showcasing different materials and how we're building them. And as I get better at doing this and more organized and fancier effects, I want to bring those effects to you guys and show you how I'm building things. If you have any questions, please don't be afraid to ask. Be happy to answer them. And hope you guys have enjoyed. As always, keep practicing, get better, and I'll see you next time as the pilgrimage continues.